The rain isn't loud, just a steady, cold whisper against the glass. It matches the quiet, hollow ache in my chest. Down on the lawn, the two of them stand under a hastily opened umbrella, water dripping from its cheap fabric onto damp, expensive shoes. The man with the clipboard and the kind, tired eyes gestures firmly towards the street. My husband, Michael, is yelling. His face is red, contorted with rage and disbelief. The woman beside him, Sarah, her perfect blonde hair now plastered to her temples, stares at the house, her eyes wide and wild like a trapped animal's. The house itself stands silent, indifferent. It looks exactly the same as it always has, the porch light casting a warm, deceptive glow on the miserable scene below. This house. Our house. The one they thought was theirs. My fingers trace the condensation on the window pane. It feels impossibly cold. The shouting from below drifts up, muffled by the glass, but the words are clear enough. You can't do this. This is illegal. We own this house. And the man with the clipboard, my attorney's representative, just shakes his head slowly. Mr. Miller, Ms. Jenkins. The court order is explicit. This property is not yours. You have 20 minutes to vacate. The sheriff's deputies are en route if you do not comply. Michael throws his hands up, screaming something about lawyers and injustice. Sarah just wraps her arms around herself, shivering, looking utterly, completely lost. They look small out there in the rain, pathetic. They thought they were so clever. They thought they had stolen everything. But standing here now, watching their carefully constructed world crumble on the rain-slicked lawn, I feel a cold, hard satisfaction settle deep in my bones. It's not the triumph I expected. It's something colder, heavier. It's the weight of justice, finally delivered, landing like a hammer blow. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. If you've ever felt like everything you built could be stolen in an instant, tell me in the comments. I read all of them. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Before the shouting, before the rain, before the cold satisfaction, there was just life. Ordinary, quiet life. I lived in this house for 12 years with Michael. 12 years of shared meals at the kitchen table, of arguments about finances, of quiet evenings watching television. The house was the constant. It was more than just walls and a roof. It was the container for our existence, the silent witness to the slow unfolding of our marriage. I loved this house. I loved the way the morning sun hit the bay window in the living room, the creak of the old floorboards upstairs, the smell of coffee brewing on a Saturday morning. I'd spent years making it ours, painting walls, planting flowers in the small garden, choosing furniture that felt like us. It was solid. It was real. It was the most stable thing I thought I had. Michael was comfortable. We weren't a fairy tale romance, not by a long shot. The passion had cooled years ago, settling into a routine of quiet companionship. He worked long hours. I had my own life, my job, my friends. We coexisted, two separate planets orbiting the same sun, this house. There was a sense of security in it, a predictable rhythm. I trusted him. Not blindly, maybe, but with the quiet, assumed trust that builds over a decade of shared bills, shared space, shared history. We talked about the future, about renovations we'd do someday, about growing old here. The house was the anchor, the proof that we had built something lasting. It felt like home. It was home. My world felt small, yes, maybe a little stagnant, but safe. Secure. Anchored. The first crack was tiny, almost imperceptible. A late night at the office that turned into 2, then 3. A new phone he was suddenly protective of. Subtle things, the kind you notice but dismiss because noticing them feels like looking for trouble. I told myself I was being paranoid. Marriage has its ups and downs, stretches of distance. This was just a down. A long one. I focused on the house, on the garden, on my own work. I tried to bridge the distance, suggesting dinners out, a weekend trip. He was always too busy, too tired. An invisible wall was slowly, silently being built between us, brick by painstaking brick, and I was too distracted by the familiar landscape of our life to see the construction happening right under my nose. Then came the letter. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't even a personal letter. It was a legal notice, tucked into a stack of junk mail, innocuous and official-looking. Property tax assessment. But the names on the notice, they weren't ours. One name was Michael's. The other was Sarah Jenkins. My breath caught in my throat. Sarah Jenkins. The name I'd seen pop up on his phone late at night, explained away as a work colleague, the name that had sparked that tiny, ignorable flicker of unease months ago. Why would her name be on our property tax assessment? My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside, the assessment was dated months prior. And attached to it, a copy of a deed. A warranty deed. Transferring ownership of this house, 123 Maple Street, from Michael Miller to Michael Miller and Sarah Jenkins. A joint tenancy deed. Dated 6 months ago.
Signed.
Notarized. Filed with the county. The paper felt like ice in my hands. The room spun. My carefully constructed world, the one I thought was built on bedrock, didn't just crack. It shattered. The house, the symbol of my security, my life with Michael, wasn't mine anymore. Or rather, it was now also hers. This stranger, this woman who had invaded my life in the shadows, now legally owned half of my home. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was physical, tangible, etched onto a public record. He hadn't just cheated. He had tried to steal my future, my stability, my very foundation. The shock was paralyzing. My first instinct was denial. This had to be a mistake. A clerical error. But the official stamps, the signatures, they were real.
The ink was dry.
The first few days were a blur of panic and disbelief. I confronted Michael, the crumpled deed in my hand, like a weapon. His face drained of color. He didn't deny it. He tried to explain, stammering about planning for the future, about how he didn't know how to tell me, about how it wouldn't change anything, lies. All of it. His eyes darted away, guilt and something else, fear?
In them.
I barely heard the words. The betrayal was too immense, too naked. He had meticulously planned this, gone behind my back, signed away my security. And with her. He admitted the affair, finally, but even that felt secondary to the gut punch of the deed. He had weaponized my home, my sanctuary. I contacted a lawyer. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely dial the number. I explained everything, the affair, the deed, the feeling of utter devastation. The lawyer was kind but cautious. A signed deed is a powerful document, he said. He talked about the complexities, about challenging the transfer, about proving fraud or undue influence. It sounded like an uphill battle, an expensive, emotionally draining uphill battle. He mentioned community property laws, but even those felt uncertain given the timing of the transfer. Hope felt like a distant star, flickering faintly in a vast, dark sky. Meanwhile, Sarah became a physical presence. She started spending nights at the house. My house. She brought her things, her clothes filling half of my closet, her toiletries crowding my bathroom counter. They acted like a couple, openly affectionate in the living room I had decorated. It felt like an invasion, a defilement. Every room, every object, was tainted by their presence. I was living in my own home, yet I felt like a trespasser, a ghost haunting the life I used to have. The lawyer initiated proceedings. Divorce, naturally. But the house was the central issue. He filed a motion to set aside the deed transfer, arguing it was a fraudulent conveyance intended to deprive me of my marital asset. Michael and Sarah got their own lawyer, an aggressive, smirking man who seemed to relish the conflict. Their lawyer argued the deed was valid, a gift freely given by Michael. They claimed I was just a scorned wife trying to cause trouble. They painted me as hysterical, unreasonable. The initial legal filings were a series of blows. Their lawyer challenged every claim. They dug into my finances, trying to find anything to discredit me. The court dates were set months away. The process was slow, agonizing. And while the legal wheels turned at a glacial pace, I was trapped living with them. It was a psychological war zone. They'd leave their things everywhere, play music I hated, cook meals, and leave the mess for me. Small, petty torments designed to make me leave, to break me. I tried to ignore them, to exist in my own bubble within the house, but it was impossible. Every time I saw Sarah sitting on my sofa, using my coffee mug, a wave of nausea and rage would wash over me. Michael avoided my eyes, but his actions spoke volumes. He was choosing her. And he was choosing to steal from me, to take away the home I had built with him, the one thing that felt stable. The house became a cage. I dreaded coming home. Sleep was elusive, filled with replays of the deed, their faces, the lawyer's cautious words. I felt powerless, cornered. Finances became a huge strain. Legal fees mounted quickly. My initial lawyer, while competent, wasn't specializing in complex property fraud within a divorce context. The bills piled up, each invoice another reminder of the mess I was in, the fortune I was spending just to fight for what was rightfully mine. Michael, meanwhile, seemed unconcerned, confident. Sarah, too. They lived in the house, rent-free, believing they had won. They started talking about renovations, openly discussing tearing down a wall, remodeling the kitchen. My kitchen. The audacity was breathtaking. They were planning their future in the ruins of mine, using the very foundation I had built. My friends offered support, but no one could truly understand the specific hell of living with the people who were trying to dispossess you. I felt isolated, ashamed. How had I been so blind? How could he do this? The why gnawed at me constantly, an unending loop of pain and confusion. Was it just about the money? Did he hate me that much? The questions had no answers, just deeper layers of hurt. The house felt colder, darker. The sun no longer seemed to shine through the bay window the same way. The creaks of the floorboards sounded sinister, like the house itself was groaning under the weight of the deception within its walls. I started researching lawyers late at night, fueled by adrenaline and despair. The first one had been okay, but I needed someone sharp, someone who specialized in property disputes, someone who saw a way through the tangled mess of the deed and the divorce. I read reviews, case studies, legal blogs. I was looking for a fighter, a strategist, someone who could see angles I couldn't. It felt like searching for a lifeline in a storm. Then I found her. Clara. Her online profile wasn't flashy, but her case history was impressive. She specialized in complex property litigation, often involving fraud or contested transfers. Her consultations weren't cheap, but I was desperate. I gathered every document I had, the original deed, the fraudulent transfer deed, the tax assessment, emails, texts, anything that might be relevant. I went to her office, a sterile, modern space that felt a million miles away from the chaos of my home. I laid everything out, my voice trembling as I recounted the story. Clara listened patiently, her expression unreadable. She asked sharp, precise questions, not about my feelings but about dates, signatures, processes. When I finished, the silence hung in the air. I braced myself for more cautious words, more talk of uphill battles. Instead, she leaned forward. "This transfer," she said, tapping the fraudulent deed with a pen, "was executed 6 months ago. Was your husband under any specific financial pressure at that time?" I thought back. Michael had started his own business a little over a year ago. It had been a drain, requiring capital loans. "Yes," I said slowly. "He took out a significant business loan around that time. He mentioned putting up collateral, but he was vague about the details." Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did he mention using the house as collateral?" "I asked him about it," I said. He said the bank wouldn't allow it because both our names weren't on the original mortgage and they'd require my signature. He said he'd figured out another way, another lie. A deliberate, calculated lie. Clara was quiet for a moment, putting the documents back in their folder. "Okay," she said, her voice calm and measured. "Here's the situation as I see it. The standard assumption is that a signed deed means ownership transferred. Uphill battle? Yes, if you just argue fraud based on the affair and the unfairness. But there's another angle. If your husband used the house as collateral for his business loan after he transferred it solely into his name and Sarah's name, the bank likely issued that loan assuming clear title. Banks are very particular about clear title, and they certainly don't want to get involved in messy property disputes, especially ones that could involve marital claims or potential fraudulent transfers. She paused, letting it sink in. Here's the strategy, she continued. We file a motion to join the bank as an interested party in the divorce and the deed challenge. We don't focus just on proving the deed was fraudulent against you. We also highlight how this transfer potentially created a cloud on the title for the bank's loan collateral. Banks have a vested interest in ensuring their collateral is secure and the title is clean. If this deed transfer is questionable, it could jeopardize their loan. My mind raced. The bank, a huge, impersonal institution with lawyers far more powerful than Michael's. They wouldn't care about his affair or Sarah's dreams of renovation. They would care about their money, their collateral, their legal exposure. This wasn't just about me fighting Michael and Sarah anymore. This was about bringing a much bigger, more formidable force into the ring. The bank won't want this mess, Clara said, a hint of steel in her voice. They'll see the potential for complex litigation, delays, maybe even losing their collateral if the deed is set aside and the house reverts to being a contested marital asset. It creates a huge liability for them. They might lean on Michael. Hard. The midpoint shift. From despair and reactive defense to cold calculation. The house was no longer just a home. It was a battleground, and the deed, a weapon. Michael had tried to use it to destroy me. Now, maybe, it could be used against him. The fear was still there, a knot in my stomach, but alongside it, a new feeling was growing. Grim determination. I wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. I was fighting to win. The weeks that followed were intense. Clara moved fast. She filed the motion to join the bank. Michael and Sarah's lawyer fought it, of course, but Clara argued effectively that the bank's security interest in the property was directly affected by the validity of the deed transfer. The judge agreed. The bank was now involved. The bank's legal department was exactly as Clara predicted, cold, efficient, and utterly uninterested in Michael's personal life or Sarah's claims. They didn't care about his love for Sarah or his betrayal of me. They cared about the potential for their collateral, the house, to be tied up in endless litigation or, worse, found to be improperly secured. They started their own investigation into the deed transfer, looking at when it was executed in relation to the loan, how Michael had represented his ownership, whether my consent, as a potentially required party depending on the loan terms and state laws, was missing. This brought a new level of pressure down on Michael. He was now dealing not just with me and my lawyer, but with the bank's legal team, who had resources and leverage he couldn't match. They threatened to call the loan, demanding immediate repayment, if he couldn't quickly resolve the title dispute or provide alternative collateral. This was money he didn't have. His business was still new, still fragile. Sarah, meanwhile, seemed oblivious or unwilling to accept the gravity of the situation. She was still living in the house, still making plans, still acting like the lady of the manor. Michael became increasingly stressed. He'd pace the house, taking hushed phone calls, his face pale. Their smug confidence began to crack. They weren't just dealing with a crazy ex-wife anymore. They were up against corporate lawyers and the potential collapse of Michael's business. Our divorce proceedings continued in parallel, but the focus was now squarely on the house and the fraudulent transfer claim, amplified by the bank's involvement. Depositions were grueling. Michael lied under oath, contradicting himself about the timing of the deed transfer and the loan application. Sarah tried to play the innocent party, claiming she knew nothing about the legal technicalities, just that Michael had given her a share of the house. But Clara was relentless, pressing them on details, exposing inconsistencies. She had discovered that Michael had explicitly represented himself to the bank as the sole owner of the house when applying for the loan, failing to disclose my marital interest or the true circumstances of the deed transfer to Sarah. This was bank fraud. A potential criminal offense. The pressure intensified. The bank's lawyers made it clear to Michael's lawyer that they wanted the title dispute resolved immediately. Their preference was for the deed transfer to Sarah to be invalidated, returning the house to being a purely marital asset, which they could then potentially enforce their lien against in the divorce settlement, provided it was handled cleanly. They didn't want Sarah on the deed, adding complexity. They didn't want the potential fraud claim hanging over their loan documentation. They just wanted a clean, enforceable security interest or their money back. Michael's lawyers started pushing for a settlement, a quick resolution. He proposed buying me out, giving me a fraction of the house's value. I refused. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the principle. It was about the deliberate, cruel way they had tried to steal my home. It was about the lies, the deception, the violation. I wanted justice. And Clara believed we could get it. We continued building our case, gathering more evidence of Michael's fraudulent representations to the bank and the circumstances surrounding the deed transfer. We found emails where Michael discussed the deed transfer with Sarah before finalizing the loan, explicitly mentioning that putting her name on the deed would require my signature if the bank knew about her involvement or my marital claim. He had planned this maneuver precisely to circumvent my rights and potentially defraud the bank. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment gift. It was a calculated scheme. The atmosphere in the house was unbearable. Michael and Sarah barely spoke to me, but their fear and resentment were palpable. They knew I was the source of their problems, the one who had brought the bank down on them. Sarah's earlier smugness was gone, replaced by a sullen anxiety. Michael was a wreck, snapping at her, arguing about money, about the lawyers. I was invisible to them, yet I held all the cards. The lowest point came during a particularly nasty exchange captured by a motion Michael's lawyer filed, demanding I contribute more to the household expenses, effectively trying to make me pay rent to live in my own home while they contested my ownership. It was outrageous, a final, petty cruelty. I felt a wave of exhaustion, so profound it was physical. My resolve wavered. Maybe I should just take whatever I could get and walk away. The fight was consuming me. It was wearing me down bone by bone. I stood in the kitchen, the heart of the home I was fighting for, and felt utterly defeated. The house felt cold and alien. But then I looked out the window at the small garden I had nurtured for years. The roses I'd planted were just beginning to bud. They didn't know about deeds or lawyers or betrayal. They just quietly went about the business of growing, of reaching for the sun. And I thought about everything I had poured into this place, not just money, but time, energy, love. My life was here. My memories, good and bad, were etched into these walls. Why should they get to walk away with it? Because they were greedy? Because they were cruel?
No.
A cold calm settled over me. I wouldn't be defeated. I wouldn't give up. They had tried to steal my home, my security, my peace. But they wouldn't succeed. I had Clara, I had the truth, and I had the bank, an unlikely ally. I would see this through, no matter the cost. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, my future. I wasn't a victim. I was a survivor. And I was done surviving their attacks. It was time to fight back, not reactively but strategically. The turning point. I dried my eyes, stood up straight, and called Clara. "We need to move," I told her. "I want this over." What's the fastest way to force their hand? Clara outlined the final steps. Based on the evidence we had gathered, the clear timeline between the deed transfer to Michael and Sarah and the bank loan, the evidence of Michael misrepresenting his ownership to the bank, the legal cloud this created on the title from the bank's perspective, we had leverage. We could file a motion for summary judgment on the deed transfer claim, arguing that there was no genuine dispute of material fact that the transfer was fraudulent and should be set aside. We could also explicitly inform the bank of the evidence of Michael's potential bank fraud, which would put even more pressure on them to act. This was the trap. Michael thought he had been clever, transferring the deed to Sarah to hide it from me and potentially shield it from his business debts, while simultaneously using the house as collateral for his loan by lying to the bank. He thought he had covered all his bases. But he hadn't accounted for the bank's relentless self-interest, or for me finding a lawyer who could connect the dots between his fraud against me and his potential fraud against them. We filed the motion for summary judgment. It was a powerful document, laying out the timeline, the inconsistencies in Michael's and Sarah's deposition testimony, and the concrete evidence of Michael's deception towards both me and the bank. We included copies of the relevant loan documents, highlighting Michael's sole signature and his representation of clear title. The bank, receiving our updated information about potential fraud affecting their collateral, didn't file a motion opposing our summary judgment. Instead, their lawyers put immense pressure on Michael's lawyer. They wanted the house title issue resolved legally and quickly, and it was clear they favored our path, setting aside the transfer to Sarah as the cleanest way to achieve that, provided my marital claim didn't mess things up too much for them. They were now pushing him towards a resolution that looked a lot like me winning the house back. A hearing was scheduled for our motion for summary judgment. Michael and Sarah's lawyer knew this was their last stand. If the judge granted our motion, the deed transfer would be nullified, and the house would revert to being a marital asset contested in the divorce, with the bank's lien now clearly against it. But they would no longer be on the deed. They would lose their claim to ownership. Clara advised me not to attend the hearing in person unless required. "Let the lawyers handle it," she said. "You've done your part, but I couldn't stay away." I sat in the back of the courtroom, a small, anonymous figure watching the legal drama unfold. Michael and Sarah were there, seated at their lawyer's table, looking nervous. Michael kept glancing at me, his face a mask of resentment and something that looked suspiciously like fear. Sarah fiddled with her hands, her eyes fixed on the judge. Clara presented our case with calm, devastating precision. She walked the judge through the timeline. The business loan application, Michael's misrepresentation to the bank, the near-simultaneous transfer of the deed to himself and Sarah, the clear intent to defraud me and potentially the bank. She argued that no reasonable jury could find this was a legitimate transfer or gift. It was a calculated maneuver. She cited case law, legal precedents. Their lawyer responded, weakly. He argued it was a gift to Sarah, that my claims were speculative, motivated by bitterness. He tried to paint Michael as a generous partner and me as a vindictive ex. But he couldn't explain away the timeline, the bank documents, or Michael's own contradictory statements. He looked increasingly flustered under Clara's calm, polite dismantling of his arguments. The judge listened intently, occasionally asking a clarifying question. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. It felt like the culmination of everything: the betrayal, the struggle, the fight. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The moment of truth. The judge paused, shuffling papers on his bench. He looked down at Michael and Sarah, then back at the documents. "Mr. Miller, Ms. Jenkins," he began, his voice even. "The evidence presented regarding the timing and circumstances of this deed transfer, particularly in light of the subsequent loan transaction with bank name, raises significant concerns. It appears this transfer was not a simple gift, but a transaction potentially designed to evade marital claims and possibly mislead the lending institution regarding the state of the title." He looked up directly at their lawyer. "The motion for summary judgment is granted. The deed transferring ownership of 123 Maple Street from Michael Miller to Michael Miller and Sarah Jenkins, dated date, is hereby declared null and void and set aside." The words hung in the air. Null and void. Set aside. It was over. The deed, their claim to the house, was wiped away as if it had never happened. Michael's face went from pale to ashen. Sarah gasped, a small, choked sound. Their lawyer slumped in his chair. And then Michael started to scream. It wasn't just yelling. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure, blindsided fury and disbelief. "No. You can't do that. This is wrong. This is our house." He half rose from his seat, pointing at the judge, at Clara, at me. "She lied. She set this up. She's taking everything." Sarah was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face, staring at the judge as if he had personally robbed her. Their lawyer frantically tried to calm Michael down, pulling at his sleeve, whispering urgent words. The judge banged his gavel. "Order. Mr. Miller, restrain yourself or you'll be held in contempt." I watched it all, sitting in the back. I felt no joy, no fist-pumping triumph, just a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. And that cold satisfaction. They hadn't just lost the house, they had been exposed. Their scheme had backfired spectacularly, thanks to their own greed and Michael's foolish attempt to play games with a bank. He had tried to steal my home, and in doing so, had jeopardized his entire business, his reputation, possibly even facing consequences from the bank. He didn't just lose the house to me. He lost it because his own web of deceit collapsed on him. The house was now a marital asset again, to be dealt with in the divorce, but they were out. Their claim was gone. Their future in my home was over. The yelling continued as security escorted Michael out of the courtroom, Sarah trailing behind him, sobbing. Stepping out of the courthouse was like entering a different world. The air was crisp, the sky surprisingly clear. The shouting was over. The legal battle for the house was won. The deed was nullified. Returning to the house was strange. It felt different. Empty. Sarah had taken her things in a hasty, tearful departure the day the eviction notice was served, the notice that followed immediately after the judge's ruling nullifying the deed. Michael was gone too, crashing with a friend, his business future now hanging precariously in the balance thanks to the bank's increased scrutiny. The house was quiet now, eerily so. No more hushed arguments, no more unwelcome footsteps. Just the familiar creaks and groans of an old house settling into itself. I walked through the rooms, running my hand along the walls. The air no longer felt thick with tension and deceit. It was just air. Clean, neutral. Winning felt hollower than I expected. Yes, I had fought back. Yes, I had won. I had reclaimed the house, the physical space they had tried to steal. But the cost was everything else. My marriage was over, irrevocably shattered not just by infidelity, but by a calculated act of financial betrayal. The trust was obliterated. The years spent building a life here felt tainted, built on a foundation that was secretly crumbling. The house stood, solid once more in my legal possession, but it was filled with ghosts. Ghosts of shared laughter that now felt like a lie. Ghosts of quiet moments that were clearly just pauses between acts of deception. Ghosts of the future I thought we were building. What do I do with this house now? The house I fought so hard for. It's mine again. Fully, legally, undeniably mine. But is it still home? Can it ever be again? Or is it just a monument to betrayal and resilience? A very expensive, very emotional monument. The divorce is ongoing, dealing with the other assets, the wreckage of a life together. The bank is still dealing with Michael. I don't follow the details. It doesn't matter anymore. The house was the symbol, the core of the fight. And I won that. I stood my ground when they tried to erase me, to take the ground right out from under my feet. I learned that sometimes the most powerful weapons aren't brute force or emotional appeals, but cold, hard facts and a legal system that, however slow and imperfect, can sometimes deliver a brutal kind of justice. I learned that you have to fight for yourself, even when you're exhausted, even when you feel utterly alone, because no one else will do it for you. The house is quiet tonight. The rain has stopped. I stand by the bay window again, looking out at the empty street. The porch light is on, just as it was that rainy afternoon. It looks welcoming, warm. Maybe, just maybe, this old house can be home again. A different kind of home. One built not on shared dreams, but on hard-won survival. One that belongs, unequivocally, to me. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version, whatever you've had to fight for or reclaim. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, subscribing truly helps bring more of these stories to life. Thanks for being here.